I'm Donna from Evoca, and welcome to the next video in our character creation set of tutorials. Today's tutorial will be focusing on the creation of the eye. So to start that, we'll, in a new scene, create a plane about 20 centimeters in length with about 5 centimeters wide and 4 segments along the length. So this will be the proportion guide, just to make sure that everything when we create the eye is in proportion. So just moving this forward, making sure it is 0 out in the X and the Z, and we'll bring it forward about 20 centimeters in minus Y, so just bringing it forward, and then renaming it to proportion guide and freezing that selection. And then I'll create a sphere in the front viewport, making sure it's 0 out in the X, Y, and Z, and making the radius about 10 centimeters. So it should be the same height as our guide. I'll unfreeze that and make sure it's X-ray before I freeze it again. So then moving back onto the eye, I'm going to change the mode from realistic to shaded, because the shadows I find to be a little bit distracting when modeling. Well, when modeling in realistic mode anyway. And then I'm just going to bring up my 4 viewports so I can see how things are moving in all 4. And then I'm going to select this ring here, and I'm going to connect them to create an extra edge. So we'll just scale that new edge so it sits on the 2/4 mark, so it's taking up 2/4 of the overall length of our guide. Check the side viewport and make sure that the curve hasn't been destroyed, so just bringing that out a little bit to keep that nice curve. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm going to chamfer this edge slightly, only a little bit, it doesn't need to be a lot. This will be the edge of the shape that we're going to create. So again, that looks about right, so just along the 2/4 mark of the eye. And again, just making sure that the curve hasn't been destroyed, and I'm going to bring the front few vertices of this forward as well. So what we're doing is we're creating the cornea of the eye. So this shape is slightly bulged, I suppose would be this of what I'm trying to say. It'll be slightly bulged. Now we don't want it to be as exaggerated as the actual eye, because it'll cause clipping issues when we rotate for animation, but we do want to mimic it somewhat so that the light will fall and shine on it, and the reflections will give the same sort of effect as the real eye will do. So I'm just scaling some of these out to create the bulge at the front of the eye. I'm just selecting this ring here and creating a new edge so I can bring this out and scale it to curve off the front. So the eye we're creating is a little bit more detailed than you would normally use in a game model. This would more likely be used for a cutscene or something that is a rendered animation, but we can use it as the base of our normal map, and if we have enough polys when we finish creating our model, we can always keep it as well. So, and just color out some of the areas. So just continuing to shape that front bulge. Somehow realistic has come back on, so I'll just switch back to a shaded. So that's a little bit flattened off. So we need to bring that out a little bit more, I think. So we can turn off our guide for now. So just right clicking and go hide unselected, and then continuing to shape the cornea. So just using the scale, so just using the XY scale. So if we get that little bit of, if you can, when we hover over our scale tool, you can see how you've got the middle section and the outer section, the thinner rectangle. If we use that, it'll only scale along the Y and the X, or whichever two that we're between, rather than scaling in all three axes. So just continuing to move these around as much as needed, so I can get the shape that I need, or shape that I want to mimic the cornea. Just pulling it forward a little bit more. Just, yep, there we go. Okay, so now what I've done is deleted half of the eye, so I can just work on half and then I can mirror it over it later. What I'm going to do is add another ring here, and I'll pull it forward so that we don't have that pole, that pinching look when we see the front of the cornea. And then I'll delete these edges here, or remove these edges I should say, to create quads. So when we put the turbo smooth on, everything gets nice and quadded. Okay, so now I'll clone that over and attach them. Making sure to weld the middle vertices together. Okay, so now we can apply our turbo smooth, and we can see that there's no pinching in the center. We've got a nice smooth cornea. You can see the shape taking effect in the perspective view. So as we've moved around, I can see that there's a slight adjustment needed, so just go in here and I'll tweak a few of these verts. Just ever so slightly. Just bring this out and back in a little bit. Just pointing. So yep, that looks better. Maybe just a little bit more. I mean, these are slight adjustments, but they do affect the overall shape, so where the light falls and the shadow falls. And there we go, our cornea is done. So I'm going to remove the turbo smooth now, and I'm going to clone this so we can create the pupil. Okay, so we'll start by, let's see, we'll bring in of the cloned sphere. We'll take these vertices back a little bit so they're in line with that double edge. We'll turn the cornea onto X-ray so we can see what we're doing, and freeze it so we can't affect it, and then go back into vertex mode, and we'll start to pull these verts back. So just unhiding everything so you can see where the pupil will lie, so it'll be about 2/4 of the overall shape, which is why we created that double edge when we created the cornea. So just bringing that back in line with the first of that double edge there, and flattening out the eye. So once we get it into approximate position, we can select them all and make planar on the Z. So there we go. Alright, so now, but what we want to do is also make this surface a little bit concave, so it actually curves in towards the eye. So we'll hide the cornea for now and the plane. So we're just working on the pupil. And we'll start to make this area concave. So it's easier to use the edge mode, so we can just select the rings. And we can start to pull these back into the eye to make the surface concave. So again, just selecting the edges and moving them back. We'll ignore that middle vert for now. So I'm just using the Alt to deselect the edges and then just bringing that back in. So it's just a slight concaved surface. It's nothing too deep, we're keeping it shallow. Once that is done, I'll select the ring here. So just select this edge and then hit ring. So we can connect them to create another edge loop. So what we're doing here is creating the actual pupil. So what we did on the outside was create the iris. So I'm just making sure that these are round. Somehow they've gotten a little bit more ellipse in shape. I'm just going to bring this forward a little bit to define the edge of the iris a little bit more. And then with this ring here, I'll shrink it just a little bit, because we don't want the pupil to take up too much of the eye. Now the reason I say this is more of a cutscene eye is because the way we're modeling it, you can actually animate the pupils so that they can dilate. That's not necessary in game, you'll never see the character that close. Making sure that none of the back end verts are there selected, so just deselecting any of those that are, and getting rid of my edge constraint and scaling them out and scaling them down a bit, I think. Yep. So just evening out that edge spacing a little bit more and making sure that's they're still round. Okay, so now I've finished adjusting those. I'm going to take this edge loop and we'll chamfer it again. So just keep it on one edge per chamfer and just keeping it a small amount, so we don't want it to be too big. It'll be creating the edge of our pupil. Once that's done, we hit OK, and we can select the inner polygons of the pupil there, so just these ones in the center. We can go down and select extrude. There it is. And we want to pull it back into the eye. So this will be the pupil, so that the pupil is basically a hole. So we want to push that back in. Pupil is the hole at the center of our eye, which allows the light go through to hit the back of the retina. Now obviously we can't. Modeling the retina will be ridiculous, so we just want to mimic the hole. So I'm just chamfering the edge a little bit, which will help us if we create a normal map from the eye. Okay, so now I'm just making sure that there's only one smoothing group for the entire eye. And I'll apply a temporary turbo smooth. So these are only temporary, we'll delete them later. It's just to get the idea of what the actual eye is looking like. I'm just going to increase the iteration slightly. So yep, that's good. You can see how the surface is slightly concaved. The pupil is pulling back into the eye. And I'll bring back the cornea now so I can see them both together. I'll unfreeze everything and I'll delete this plane so we no longer need that. What we'll do now is with the pupil selected, so the iris, the middle eye, okay, yep, we'll pull this down and shrink it so it sits inside the cornea. It's not actually touching the cornea. Okay. So I'm just going to type in 96 for each of the scale axes. And I'll apply a turbo smooth to the cornea again and up the iteration. And there we go. Our eye is created. So what we'll do in preparation of bringing it into the scene is, instead of combining them together, so attaching both of the meshes together, we'll group them. So we'll have to ungroup them once we bring them into our scene, but for now it'll just be easier to have them as the one group. So just select both and go into group and hit group, name it eye. And if we bring up our layers palette, we can switch to hierarchy mode just by pressing this button here, and you can see that the eye is the top of the top group, and you've got the cornea and the sclera underneath the group, so the pupil part of the eye. So just save it in a location that you'll know and you can remember. I'm just going to save mine in the morgue so I can go back to it and I can use it again whenever I need another eye. And then we're done. That's it. The eye is complete.